Most cybersecurity failures don't happen because security is weak. They happen because convenience wins. Every system, every app, every login process is constantly balancing two forces: protection and usability. And almost every time those forces compete, convenience moves slightly ahead, not dramatically, not recklessly, but just enough to make things smoother, faster, and easier. And that small shift multiplied across billions of interactions becomes the foundation of modern cyber risk.
Breach Bites TV.
If security were the only priority, the internet would look very different. Every login would require multiple physical devices. Every transaction would require manual verification. Every account recovery process would involve identity proofing that takes days. Systems would be hardened, restrictive, and slow. They would also be unusable for most people. So companies optimize for adoption, they reduce friction, they streamline flows, they remove steps. Each removed step is a calculated trade-off. Think about password requirements. At one point, systems forced complex combinations of uppercase letters, numbers, and symbols, changed every 90 days. Users hated it. Productivity dropped. Help desk tickets increased. So policies softened. Passphrases became acceptable. Rotation requirements were reduced. From a usability perspective, this made sense. But every adjustment toward convenience slightly reshaped the threat landscape. Attackers adapted accordingly. Two-factor authentication followed the same path. Hardware tokens were strong but inconvenient, so SMS codes became common. SMS codes were easy but vulnerable, so push notifications became popular. Push notifications reduced typing friction, but they introduced approval fatigue. Each evolution made authentication smoother for users. Each evolution also created new behavioral weaknesses. Security didn't disappear, it was negotiated. Convenience doesn't just influence authentication. It shapes software design at every layer. Automatic login sessions keep users signed in for weeks. Browser password managers autofill credentials instantly. Devices remember trusted networks. Cloud platforms synchronize data across all devices without manual confirmation. These features are powerful and helpful, but they also reduce the number of deliberate decisions users make. Deliberate decisions are often where security awareness lives. The more automatic a system becomes, the less attention we give it. When login prompts are rare, we notice them. When they're constant, we approve them reflexively. When security warnings are unusual, they stand out. When they appear frequently, they become background noise. Convenience normalizes security signals. And once something becomes normal, it stops triggering caution. Attackers understand this deeply. They design campaigns that mimic normal workflow. A file sharing request that looks like every other file sharing request. A login notification that feels routine. A password reset email that matches the standard template. They don't create chaos, they create familiarity. Because familiarity moves quickly and speed reduces scrutiny. There's also a business incentive problem. Security controls that are too restrictive reduce customer growth. If signing up for an account is complicated, users abandon the process. If checkout requires too many verification steps, purchases drop. If employees struggle with access controls, productivity slows. So companies measure friction carefully. When friction affects revenue, it gets optimized away. This creates an invisible threshold. Security must be strong enough to prevent obvious abuse, but not so strong that it disrupts engagement. That threshold is constantly shifting, and attackers probe it continuously, looking for the exact point where usability outweighs verification. Even features marketed as security improvements are often convenience upgrades in disguise. Remember this device. Stay signed in. One-click approval. These options reduce user frustration, but they also extend trust over time and space. A remembered device becomes a long-term credential. A persistent session becomes a silent access channel. A one-click approval removes hesitation. Each feature feels harmless in isolation. Combined, they create a landscape where access is fluid and persistent. Consider account recovery processes. If someone forgets their password, recovery must be simple enough that legitimate users can regain access quickly. But that simplicity can be exploited. Security questions based on personal history are easy to research. Email-based resets depend on the security of another account. SMS resets depend on phone number integrity. The system must assume some signal represents the rightful owner. That assumption is the trade-off. Convenience also shapes human behavior in subtle ways. When systems are designed to minimize interruptions, users become accustomed to low-friction access. So when a prompt appears, it feels like an obstacle rather than a safeguard. The emotional response shifts from caution to annoyance. And annoyance accelerates action. Attackers rely on that acceleration. There's a psychological principle at work here called cognitive ease. When something feels easy to process, we trust it more. Smooth interfaces feel legitimate. Familiar workflows feel safe. Minimal resistance feels correct. Convenience creates cognitive ease, and cognitive ease reduces suspicion. Security, by contrast, often creates friction, and friction signals that something requires attention. When friction is engineered away, attention follows. This tension explains why some of the most secure environments in the world are also the least convenient. High-security facilities require badges, escorts, multiple checkpoints, and strict monitoring. No one expects convenience in those environments. But online, we expect speed. We expect seamless transitions. We expect instant access from anywhere. So digital security is constantly pressured to feel invisible. The phrase frictionless experience is celebrated in product design. But friction is often where security lives. Friction forces pause. Pause creates evaluation. Evaluation catches anomalies. Remove the pause, and anomalies blend in. Convenience compresses time between action and outcome. And when time compresses, verification weakens. None of this means convenience is bad. Modern life depends on it. Remote work, cloud collaboration, mobile banking, instant communication, all of these rely on smooth authentication and persistent sessions. The goal isn't to eliminate convenience. It's to recognize that every convenience feature expands the attack surface slightly. Attackers rarely defeat systems head-on. They look for edges. The edge where a session lasts a little too long. The edge where a recovery process is just permissive enough. The edge where a push notification is approved without context. They operate in the gray space created by optimization. Organizations attempt to solve this with layered controls. Risk-based authentication increases friction only when behavior deviates from normal patterns. Zero-trust models reevaluate access continuously, rather than assuming trust after login. Hardware-based authentication ties credentials to specific devices. These approaches aim to preserve convenience while restoring verification depth. But even they must balance user tolerance. At a personal level, understanding this trade-off changes how you interact with technology. When something feels extremely easy, ask what was simplified to make it that way. When access persists indefinitely, consider what signal is maintaining that trust. When a notification appears routine, pause long enough to confirm context. Small intentional pauses reintroduce friction where it matters most. There's also a cultural narrative that technology should remove every obstacle. It should be faster, simpler, and instant. But security is, by nature, an obstacle. It is the intentional slowing of access to ensure legitimacy. So the more a culture prioritizes instant gratification, the more security feels like a burden rather than a protection. Many high-profile breaches share a common thread. Not broken encryption, not advanced zero-day exploits, but instead, valid credentials used in unintended ways. Legitimate access extended too far. Normal behavior slightly manipulated. Convenience creates systems that assume continuity. Attackers introduce subtle deviation. The deeper pattern across this entire series becomes clearer here. Password rules fail when they ignore behavior. Smart people get hacked because familiarity overrides analysis. Two-factor authentication isn't enough because approval becomes routine. Identity is fragile because signals can be copied. And convenience ties all of it together. It is the underlying force shaping the environment attackers exploit. Security is strongest when friction is intentional and meaningful. Not excessive, not constant, but strategically placed. A well-timed verification prompt that only appears when context changes. A short session timeout for sensitive systems. A hardware key for high-value accounts. These measures acknowledge that convenience must sometimes yield to protection. The danger comes when convenience becomes invisible. When users no longer recognize where trust is being extended, when persistent sessions feel permanent, when recovery flows feel automatic, that invisibility creates blind spots. And blind spots are where compromise begins. If you zoom out far enough, cybersecurity isn't a battle between hackers and software. It's a negotiation between speed and certainty. Security requires certainty. So when you hear about another breach, consider not just what failed technically, but what was optimized behaviorally. What friction was removed? What assumption was extended? What convenience feature was stretched slightly beyond safe boundaries? You don't need to reject convenience to be secure, but you do need to recognize its cost. Every streamlined workflow, every remembered device, every persistent session is a trust decision made on your behalf. Becoming aware of those decisions is the first step toward resilience. Cybersecurity will always struggle as long as convenience is treated as the higher priority by default. But informed users and well-designed systems can rebalance the equation. Not by eliminating ease, but by inserting thoughtful pauses at critical moments. If you found this breakdown helpful, consider subscribing. This channel isn't about fear. It's about understanding the forces shaping modern digital risk. We've explored password failures, identity fragility, and authentication limits. And now we've looked at the tension underneath them all, because real security isn't just about stronger locks. It's about knowing when to slow down. I'll see you in the next one.